Good morning and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. I'm very excited this morning to learn with you and and to move into a new decade of the Psalms, right? We've spent the last several classes doing the Psalms in the 50s that were called the Michtam Psalms, which were very kind of had a philosophical bent and uh, they were all connected to specific moments in David's life, especially with the different enemies that David had. And while each individual psalm didn't necessarily, well, I thought our conversations about them were terrific, but we found that a lot of these psalms didn't get picked up on in the Jewish liturgy. And one of the things that we talked about was that, the psalm, each individual psalm didn't really sort of fit in necessarily like a prayerful mode. But when we talked about the whole arc of all of the psalms in the 50s, we really found that there was a consistent theme that ran through them and a very powerful set of very powerful messages about trust in God and about the importance of having a sense of faith, of living a life guided by the choice to to be in relationship with a higher power, like to have that knowledge that God is guiding, that there's providence, a sense of an ordained path or a plan. And those things might indeed be very prayerful as concepts, even if the like individual psalms themselves didn't really make it into the prayer service. So we've moved on now to Psalm 61. So we're in the next decade of Psalms, the 60s, and we'll find that these Psalms have a slightly different feeling, right? I've talked about this before. We don't really know how the book of Psalms was compiled, but that is, scholars of Psalms, suspect that there were collections of Psalms, like that these Psalms weren't written for the book of Psalms. There were collections of Psalms that were then compiled. And so, like the Michtam Psalms might have been one such collection. And we've moved on from those Psalms. We're on a different collection. So, but like usual, we'll read the Psalm out loud in Hebrew and in English, and then we'll be reading it first with an eye toward what emotion the Psalm brings up. What does it evoke in you? And then if you are going to use this psalm as a prayer, or if you are going to use aspects of this psalm in your personal worship, in what context would you use it, and how might it fit into your spiritual life? So, I'll share my screen. Um, just uh, as a note, if you lose me, it's because I've lost internet, but the internet comes back pretty quickly, does go in and out. Um, at the summer camp that my wife is working at full time, and I am working from here today and also next Tuesday. So I'm not in my office, but in my wife's office at camp. All right, Psalm 61. למנצח על נגינת לדוד. שמעה אלוהים רינתי, הקשיבה תפילתי. מקצה הארץ אליך אקרא בעטוף ליבי, בצור ירום ממני תנחני. כי היית מחסה לי, מגדל עוז מפני אויב. אגורה באוהלך עולמים, אחסה בסתר כנפיך סלע. כי אתה אלוהים שמעת לנדרי, נתת ירושת יראי שמך. ימים על ימי מלך תוסיף שנותיו כמו דור ודור. ישב עולם לפני אלוהים, חסד ואמת מן ינצרוהו. כן אזמרה שמך לעד, לשלמי נדרי יום יום. For the leader with instrumental music of David. Hear my cry, O God, heed my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you. When my heart is faint, you lead me to a rock that is high above me. For you have been a refuge, a tower of strength against the enemy. Oh, that I might dwell in your tent forever, take refuge under your protecting wings. Selah. O God, you have heard my vows. Grant the request of those who fear your name. Add days to the days of the king. May his years extend through generations. May he dwell in God's presence forever. Appoint steadfast love to guard him. So I will sing hymns to your name forever, as I fulfill my vows day after day. Here's the King James Version. To the chief musician upon Nigina, a psalm of David. Hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth will I cry unto thee when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in thy tabernacle forever. I will trust in the covert of thy wings. Selah. For thou, O God, hast heard my vows. Thou hast given me the heritage of those that fear thy name. Thou wilt prolong the king's life, and his years as many generations. He shall abide before God forever. Oh, prepare mercy and truth which may preserve him. So I will sing praise unto thy name forever, that I may daily perform my vows.
Mm.
For the conductor, on strings, for David. Hear, God, my cry. Attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth echoes my call to you when my heart is ebbing. Lead me to a rock that towers above me. For you have become my refuge, a tower of strength in the face of the enemy. I shall sojourn in your tent for eternities. I shall take refuge in the secret places of your wings. Selah. For you, God, have hearkened to my vows. You have given me the inheritance of those who revere your name. May you add seasons to the sovereign's seasons. May his years be like generation upon generation. May he sit enthroned before God forever. Appoint mercy and truth to guard him. Thus will I sing your name forever, that I may fulfill my vows in every season. So we'll start with the question of what is the emotional experience of this psalm? What is what is the experience of reading it? Larry?
It sounds like someone. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Nope, go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry. Um, just just thinking that sounds like someone who's seeking comfort, who is afraid and is seeking shelter with God.
The the poem, so what you get from it is the like a person like fear that a person has experienced something
Yes,
that has terrified them, and so like this is a poem for comfort in the face of fear.
yes.
Larry?
It sounds like someone who I agree with that. It's his faith is being tested, and he suspects somehow that it's its own his own problem, and it has to do with the vows, the strength of the vows. And I'm not clear what the vows really means, whether it's the mitzvot or something else. But he recognizes that something's wrong, and you've helped me before God. I need to be lifted up again and put in a safe place. I'm being threatened. And is it my fault because I have not been scrupulous in my vows? That's what gives me trouble. I don't know what it is that's given him this faint heart.
Mm,
Yeah. So Barbara thought that it was an experience of fear that gives him this sense of being faint-hearted, this sense of weakness that that he it causes him to turn to God for strength and comfort. And Larry is saying, well, it might not be fear exactly. It's definitely something. And maybe given the this preoccupation in the second half of the psalm with the vows, maybe he feels that he hasn't fulfilled his duty to his vows. Maybe there's some, maybe it's a prayer after having forsook a promise or after having not lived up to to his own ideal version of keeping his vow. On the other hand, when he discusses his vow, he does sort of seem to say that he has um that he has done the vows, right? He says, "You have heard my vows, and let me pay my vows day after day." I don't know. I I agree. I think it's a little confusing.
Doth protest too much.
So Larry says the fact that he is so preoccupied with the vows suggests that he hasn't, in fact, been as scrupulous with them as he expects of himself to be. Otherwise, it wouldn't be repeated twice.
He's not criticizing God. It's God, I'm not criticizing you.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's me, but help me, put me in a place where I can do that better, maybe. It's,
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
he's afraid to criticize God.
yeah, yeah. So,
It's
from the end of the earth echoes my call to you when my heart is ebbing. Right? He feels very distant from God.
yeah.
He feels very distant from God. And yet, you have become my refuge, a tower of strength. I shall sojourn in your tent for eternities.
You have been my shelter, a
Yeah,
tower of strength. It's the enemy, which is a modern translation. It's almost a past imperfect.
it is that. It is that. And we've talked about this before. Um, it's very hard to translate some of these verbs because what tense they are is hard to get, right? When you look at this verse, ki hayita machseli. Hayita is, in modern Hebrew, hayita would be a past tense. In biblical Hebrew, hayita is a perfect form, meaning refers to something that happened in the past. You were in the past uh, a machse, a shelter for me. Migdal oz mipnei oyev, a tower of strength in front of the enemy or before the enemy, right? So it is a perfect form in the sense that it is it happened in the past, and yet The way that that Hebrew works is sometimes when you have a perfect verb like this, uh, it actually is affected by the previous verb because if you're talking about sort of continuous action and then you use the past verb, like probably the best way to translate that would be to incorporate into the continuous action kind of, right? Like, so some of the translations have definitely treated this hayita as an imperfect, right? It began in the past, but it isn't completed.
Right.
So that's where you get the, you have become or you have been, right? Like that is something which began in the past, but potentially still continues.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not, right? Yeah, I mean, I think there's the potential for continuation, but
That's what it
it's not a
is.
sure thing. And that's why he's praying for this. That's why he's reaching out to God and why he's saying, God, listen to my prayer, right? Like, hear me.
He's almost asking for the strength to fulfill whatever kind of vows those are, whatever he's fallen short at, either his actions or thoughts or attitudes. He's asking for strength so that we can restore all this.
Yeah, yeah. When he says, you have given me the inheritance of those who fear your name, right? Like count me among those who are God-fearing. Is that sort of the sense that I get?
If it were Christian, you'd almost hear him say, increase my faith.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think the prayer for increased faith is just Christian.
Then
I d-
maybe that's what it is.
right. I
Hebrew
do
also.
agree. I do agree with you that modern Jews sometimes struggle with that kind of language. And
That's what
and
I.
that's true. And we've talked about that before. I think a lot of that has to do with living in a post-Holocaust world and living in a world with rising anti-Semitism, living like it's hard to be a Jew, you know. I think that's part of that. I think that's part of the current ethos of the Jewish people is a Jewish people that struggles with faith. I mean, and I definitely think, right, the Psalms are a spiritual resource that we're Jewish first, that are come from our Jewish tradition. And so, I think it's completely legitimate to say he's praying for increased faith. He's praying for a sense of God's presence. He's praying for being able to feel that God counts him among those who are God-fearing, faithful servants of God.
It almost seems like the vows are the mitzvah, and that is a replacement for faith. And
Hmm.
he has weakened his performance or the spirit with which he performs the commandments. And he senses that, and he's asking God subtly to strengthen his performance of the his attitude towards his performance of the mitzvah.
Yeah. When we perform mitzvot, the intention by which we perform them is important, but it isn't as important as doing the action itself. Judaism believes very strongly that the actions that we do um, create the emotions that we want. And I think they do that in part when we open up our hearts to being moved by them. And a prayer like this has that potential.
That feels like the intention of this psalm.
Hmm. What do
It's
you
a,
make of the reference to the king? Add days to the days of the king.
is it David? Is it the Mashiach to come? Is it God himself? It can't be God himself because God doesn't need that kind of encouragement.
Yeah,
Is it to the worldly rulers, whoever they are?
yeah. So I don't always share it, but I bring one translation that every every translation, every choice in how to translate comes from the interpretation of how Rashi understands this psalm. Well, Rashi is an 11th century commentator from France, and and the one of our most prolific commentators. And so Rabbi Shraga Silverstein in 2014 translated the Psalms and also all of Ketuvim, all of writings, using the interpretations of Rashi as his translation guide. But he does put brackets so that you can tell what parts are not literal translations and but what parts are the way that he translated based on Rashi's interpretation. So when you read his translation, for the conductor of the singing a psalm of David, hear, O God, my song, give heed to my prayer. Although I find myself from the ends of the earth, that is, very far from those who would battle against my enemies, upon you do I call when my heart fails because of their absence. My prayer, lead me over a rock that is a foe raised above me, that is stronger than I, right? So according to Rashi, this psalm is a psalm. David is saying, even though I've been separated from my army, even though I am at the ends of the earth, not from God, but from my people, my supporters, my cohort, right? Even then, deliver my enemy, that is the rock, unto me. For you were ever a shelter to me, a tower of strength against the foe. Right? So, what I like about that interpretation of the rock, I don't think it's the literal meaning, but what I like about that interpretation is it makes verse 4 make more sense, right? Like when it's, you know, I'm going to call you from very far away, lead me to a rock that is too high for me because you have been a refuge, a tower of strength in the face of the enemy. You're like, wait, what enemy? What is going on here? But if the rock is the enemy, then God's raising a shelter, a tower of strength makes sense. Let me dwell in your tent forever, that is, in this world and the next. Let me find shelter in the covert of your wings forever. For you, O God, have ever heard my vows. You have restored through me the inheritance of the fearers of your name. In other words, because of my actions, because of my vows and the actions that I have done because of those vows, I have managed to raise back up the kingdom of Israel. I have conquered territory, the inheritance, the land of the Jewish people that they didn't have, in the previous generation. Therefore, add more days over the decreed days of the king David, so that his years be as those of all the generations, that is 70 years. But he says, um, see, because I did this, I deserve a longer life. Give me a longer life. Let him always sit before God. Let the loving kindness and the truth that he upholds be upheld to guard him. Thus, as you vouchsafe good to me, shall I sing your name forever in payment of my vows, day by day. Well, I think Rashi's interpretation of this psalm is very different from from what we've just been talking about, which is not to say that it is wrong, just that I don't think it's the plain meaning of the text. That is I think the conversation we were having before is much closer to the plain meaning. And yet, I think it's very important to see the sort of allegorical or metaphorical approach that Rashi takes in understanding this psalm.
I can see how he got there.
I can see how he got there too. It's not so far away from what we were saying that it's no, I think in some ways this interpretation explains some of the harder to understand passages in the psalm that sort of felt a little incongruous or like, what is going on here? And you know, and uh and
He's making the whole
Rashi,
thing literal. He really is being much more literal about it, even though he's using an allegory. It's literal in the sense of it's David asking for this, his armies, all the. It's like it's a continuation of the story of David, as
right,
opposed to a more. Uh, the whole thing is an allegory for ordinary people.
yes,
Ordinary people do not have armies.
right.
We want
Yeah,
to be on
that's
a rock so that when the Guadalupe River overflows, we're up high.
yeah, I think that's a good way uh to explain the that. I do. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Do we know how old David was when he died?
Yeah. Yes. The the book of Kings tells us um let's see. I believe he was 70. He I believe 70. There's a midrash that Adam was supposed to live 1,000 years, but he sees this vision that David's gonna die at birth, and David's supposed to be the greatest king of Israel. And so Adam says, "Give him a lifetime from me." And
Wow.
that's why Adam dies at 930. You, this why does the Midrash bring that up? Because you would think if you were writing a story about gradual decrease of lifespan, you would think that the first person would live the longest, and then there would be a gradual decrease. But Methuselah, right? Methuselah, who is Adam's grandchild, lives longer than Adam. He lives to be like 960 or something, 962. I don't remember exactly. But it's longer than Adam. Adam dies at 930. So so the rabbis, they look at this story and it's confusing. You would expect Adam to live the longest, and he doesn't. 930 years is only 70 shy of 1,000. Well, who lives 70 years according to the Bible? David. So those numbers must be connected. those numbers must be connected.
Just thinking about that concept makes you think about the simultaneity of time,
Yeah,
the the infinity of time being that it's all there at once. In today's language, you would say in quantum superposition.
right.
I think we're just starting to get a peek at reality with our science, just beginning initial peaks.
Yeah, but isn't it amazing that people who have been engaged in religious, in in engaging with the spirit, have known these mystical truths for thousands of years, and we're only now understanding them through science?
Well, science is nothing but engineering. We're starting to understand the concepts that underlie or that are result from the truths that religion has always known.
Yeah,
We're like children.
got to figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Only
so
we can see the footprints that we say, oh, must have been here.
yeah, so another way to think about this is, right, if you're reading the entire Tanakh, every part of it is connected to every other part.
And it's all now.
It's, yeah, it is, yeah. So the rabbis see that David lives for exactly 70 years, that Adam lives 930, and that's weird because you would expect him to live longer than his grandchild. You would expect there to be I mean, it is. When you read through the book of Genesis, it is clear that part of what's going on is a shortening of lifespans, right? That's part of the myth, right? People in the Garden of Eden were going to live forever, but because they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God punished them with death, with a lifespan. And then in the time of Noah, they hear that it's increasingly short lifespans. And Abraham lives to 175 and Jacob lives to 130 and Moses lives to 120 and that is the longest lived person, and so much so that we wish people on their birthdays we say may you live in good health to 120, but we don't say may you live in good health to 930.
It'd be
Right? We
torture.
understand that the human lifespan, right, has decreased from mythic time to now. And then we have King David, who lived 70 years
Instead of not,
instead
not
of not living at all, at least according to the Midrash, right? And instead of dying at birth.
well, they weren't confused by thinking they could understand God. Right now, we think we can understand God. And that's the biggest sin going on.
Well, yes, if you think you can understand it, aren't you turning yourself? You're making yourself into God.
When Jacob wrestled with the angel, he asked him at the end, what is your name? And the angel said, why do you ask what my name is? What are you trying to label here and understand and control? Don't you know what all this is?
Yeah.
Stop being so rational and descriptive.
Yeah, we can't control everything. Really, very much can't control anything except for maybe our reactions to the world.
Which is just aligning yourself with it as opposed to trying to then wrestle it and control it. Just be aligned with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Jewish tradition doesn't think that wrestling with it is bad. Wrestling with it is part of how we come to understand it. Wrestling with it is
I mean,
part of how we align ourselves with it.
yes.
It's it's a part of the process.
It's
All
wrestling with our
right.
human nature.
That's it. That's right. Okay, so I was only able to find one use of this psalm in the Jewish liturgical tradition. We don't use Psalm 61, except this verse, the verse 3, Miktsei haaretz, Eilecha ekra ba'atof libi b'tzur yarum mimeni tancheni. So the part that begins Eilecha ekra, I guess they were finding it hard to find verses that began with Aleph or with the word Elecha, right? We've talked about this before. There's a tradition of when the Kohanim are blessing the people, and the and they come up to the bima, on the holidays, and they give the priestly blessing. Everybody covers their eyes so that they don't accidentally get blinded by God's presence that comes into the room through the Kohanim. And the Kohanim cover their faces and they raise their hands to bless the people. And so that all the Kohanim are on the same footing, whether they're literate or not. The Shaliach Tzibor, the prayer leader, the cantor, or whoever's leading the service, gives them the words of the blessing one by one. So the prayer leader will say, Eilecha, and then the Kohanim will say, Eilecha, okay. And so there's a tradition of reciting verses, mostly from Psalms, but also from other places, that begin with the same words. So, or that have the same theme, so that when you get blessed, uh, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. When you're not just getting blessed, may the Lord lift up God's countenance to you and grant you peace. But you're also blessed with all of the other verses that you are reading, and they're all like verses that are uplifting verses. So, and they all connect to word by word. So, one of the possible verses that you could read when you hear the word elecha, which means to you, is this verse, verse 3. But you'll notice that verse 3 starts Miktsei haaretz. So they just creatively cut off the first two words of this verse and pretended the verse starts with the word Elecha. No, it's the rest of the verse from there onward. So instead of from the ends of the earth, it's just, I call to you, I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. So that is the only instance of a verse in um, from this psalm used in Jewish liturgy, and it's a very minor thing because it's not everybody's custom to recite verses during the priestly blessing. So first you have to be at a synagogue that does the priestly blessing, which ours does not, and then you have to be at a synagogue that does the priestly blessing and that has the custom of reciting verses during it. And then there are other verses that could be used for Elecha. This isn't the most obvious one. Psalm 123:1 actually begins with the word Elecha. And so, like, that is a more common word. Also, the word Elecha appears in the priestly blessing twice or three times. And so there are a lot of verses that have Elecha. This is like a very minor one. It doesn't even actually begin with Elecha. It begins Miktsei Haaretz. Anyway, this is just to say this is a very, very minor use of this psalm. You could almost have simply said this psalm is not quoted in Jewish liturgy, but I was able to find this one case, so I brought it to you. And I think we'll talk a little bit about Richard Levy's understanding of this psalm, his spiritual applications, because I think it's really beautiful what he writes often. So he says, where are the secret places of God's wings for us? Where are the secret places, right? The psalmist asks to be sheltered in the covert of God's wings, right? The psalmist is asking to be hidden by God's sheltering wings. What is this secret place of God's wings for us? Is it a physical place? A chair by a window, a seat beneath a favorite tree, looking intently at the night sky, or taking several steps into a woods, right? Is it like, you know, is the secret place like Henry David Thoreau's Walden? Is it is the secret place like you know, the field at the summer camp? Like, since I'm here at camp, is it a spiritual place? One that we find in closing our eyes, or looking out the window for a long time, or in the midst of a profound discussion with a loved one, reading a favorite poem or other piece of literature, or listening to a great piece of music, or standing before a great work of art. Sometimes we can find those secret places only during or following prolonged silence, 10 or 15 minutes at the least, emptying our mind and just listening to the silence, looking deep inside the darkness that envelops our eyes. Finding the secret places of God's wings takes time and a yearning to discover them. And I think that's true whether they're physical or spiritual, whether we're talking about the woods or a deep discussion with loved ones. Taking refuge in the presence of God can also inspire us, like the poet, to make vows that will bring God's protection into others in our lives. Vows are serious things in the Jewish understanding. There are serious implications to breaking vows. But a vow to try actions is generally a vow that can be fulfilled. To try to learn more, to try to love more sensitively, more passionately, to try to become a more involved citizen, acting more on our principles. And vows need to have specifics. What specific actions will we take to increase our learning, our loving, our involvement? Vows can give us more power over the direction of our lives. Vows that can give us more power over the direction of our lives may also help us relate to the poet's blessing upon the sovereign. The idea of sovereignty may seem foreign to us until we remember that, created in the image of God, who is Melech HaOlam, the ruler of time and space, there is sovereignty in us as well. Where do we find God's ruling hand in our life? How might we describe the realm over which we feel sovereign? Our beliefs, our commitments, our love for others, and the love we receive from them, the knowledge we have acquired from our studies. How do we rule in those realms? What do we take in and what do we give back? How are we growing through our commitments, our knowledge, and our love? How is our sovereignty serving as a model for the rest of the world?
Takasha.
What do you think, Linda?
I just said that that's hard.
How is it hard? In what ways do you find it hard?
You're talking about one person's thought being for the whole world. That's tough. I mean, that's impossible. Lafidati.
You mean God's thought?
I don't know what was the last sentence there.
How is our sovereignty serving as a model for the rest of the world? Ha Our sovereignty, meaning the actions that we take, the vows that we make, the choices that we choose.
It
How
can
how
only
are
be
our choices a dugma ishit, a personal model? How are we living a life as an exemplar?
it's hard to believe that the whole world is going to listen to what I'm thinking about.
But I don't think that's what he's saying. He's not talking about what the actions of the rest of the world are. He's talking about how you think about your own actions. Right? We talked a little bit earlier in this conversation about the ways in which we just don't have control over everything. The
Uh-huh.
ways in which surrender is an important spiritual practice, right? What he's saying is that sovereignty is also a spiritual practice. And sovereignty and surrender are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
It's it's like the serenity prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I mean, it's not originally from Alcoholics Anonymous, but they use it. The serenity prayer that God should give the strength, right, to change the things we can, and I
To
forget it exactly.
accept those that we cannot and the wisdom to know the
The
difference.
wisdom to know the difference. Both
Yeah.
of those are important, right? It's important both to, I think the wisdom of the 12-step program is you start by surrendering. You start by acknowledging the things you can't control. But by doing that, you actually, by letting go of the things you can't control, you actually end up having much more control over the things you can control.
Mhm.
Like, that's what I think this is talking about. The sovereignty that he is talking about is the sovereignty over your choices, the sovereignty over your vows. Larry.
Levy touches on a practice that I've been doing for about 35, 40 years now, a thing called centering prayer, where you sit in silence, either alone or with others, with the intention of consenting to the presence and action of God within you. And the exercise and what you can control is to not retain thoughts. To as thoughts appear, let them go. Let them go. Don't retain it. Don't try to remember it. Don't try to respond to it. Just sit in silence and let God inhabit you by letting go of all those things that you cannot control, which are those thoughts, which leaves space for God to enter and occupy you. Instead of spending our days occupied by our own thoughts, which run on continuously, we practice, it's sort of a vow, I guess, letting them go. And the timing is interesting. He said 10, 15 minutes at least. It's 20 minutes is what the session is of sitting in silence.
Yeah. Folks who do meditation. Also, it takes a bit to settle in. When I've dabbled a little bit in meditation, you, in a sit, you let the thoughts bubble up and you acknowledge that they are thoughts and you let them float away. And the same with feelings. Oh, and sensations. Feel a little tightness in my thigh. I'm accepting that feeling, that sensation, and I'm letting it go.
Let it go.
Well, after a while, you're going to want that cramp to go away. Sorry.
So
No,
wonderful.
no, no, no.
It
What?
stays, it stays with you. It it helps you. I think of it as rise to be in a place where you're sitting on the rock and the thoughts are somewhere else below, floating down the river of time. And you're sitting there and you're filled with what's above. You're sitting high and the river floats by.
Yeah,
So wonderful. Yet it is meditation. The only difference is instead of a mantra that you're constantly working on, some of the monks who propose this suggest using a word just as a sign of your intention to consent to the presence and action of God and to let go of all thoughts. So when you find, if you find yourself surrounded by thoughts again, because it inevitably happens, you just simply silently say the word in your mind as a sign that you'd like to let it all go. It's very helpful.
yeah.
Mhm.
Barbara.
I think it's very helpful too. I use the image of clouds floating past. You can't really grasp them. Um, and it's a way of not judging what it is that I'm thinking about. So I get myself into some kind of furor. Um, and if I can just let them float by like a cloud, it helps.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
You get some of the sense of that in the 61st Psalm, where this is where he'd like to be. Help me get there, Lord.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll meet again next Tuesday at 10 a.m. for Psalm 62.
Great.
Wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you. This was really helpful.
and, Barbara.
Have a good
Thank
week.
You